Hello, happy Sabbath. Welcome back to a chapter a day. Today we are going to be reading chapter 7 of 1 Kings. Yesterday we saw Solomon finishing up the house of God, and they described in detail so much of the materials he used and the carvings that he did, and the size of each of the doors and the ark, and I mean, it just sounded so magnificent. I am sure it was a sight to behold, because the Israelites and the Jews, even up to Jesus' time, was so proud of that temple that Solomon had built. Okay, so now we are going to go into chapter 7, and thank you to the faithful viewer who commented on the fact that I sort of queried if it was actually 7 years that he finished building or 11 years. So she confirmed my thought, my afterthought, that yes, it was 7 years he built the temple, but 11 years in which he was reigning. So thank you for that confirmation. Going on. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon four rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And it was covered with the cedar above upon the beams that lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. And there were windows in 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. And all the doors and posts were square with the windows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. And he made a porch of pillars. Okay, so I'm going to just try to explain. I think what they're describing here is Solomon's own house. So he finished the house of the Lord in 7 years, but he took 13 years to do his own house. So he was more focused in getting the house of God done. Amen to that. So they're describing how he had the size of it. Also, he built a house of the forest of Lebanon. I'm not sure what that is. If he built it in Lebanon, it may have been that he built a house. You know, we think that it's only now that people have houses way off in other lands where they live in another part of the world. There's nothing new under the sun. Anything we have imagined now, I was just talking to my daughter about that. Things that young people are doing today and giving it a different name, it had been done decades and centuries ago even. Just that they're now naming it. They didn't create it. But Solomon's house, I think what they mean with light onto light, the windows were so exactly opposite each other that the light came in from both ends squarely, evenly, and maybe just, you know, light upon light. That's my interpretation of it. Verse 6. And he made a porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. And the porch was before them, and the other pillars and the thick beam were before them. Then he made a porch for the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment. And it was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. And his house where he dwelt had another court within the porch, which was of the like work. Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto this porch. All these were of costly stones, according to the measures of hewed stones, sawed with saws, within and without, even from the foundation unto the coping, and so on the outside toward the great court. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. So just like he spared no cost and no material to build God's house, he's building his own house with the same mindset. Verse 11. And above were costly stones after the measures of hewed stones and cedars. And before I go on, he did marry Pharaoh's daughter, remember? So he built her a house also, and I could imagine its magnificence. Because she was a king's daughter, and she was married to a king. So she must have had a magnificent home, palace even. Verse 13. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding, and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. So he did not just grab anybody off the street and put them to work on his construction. I know sometimes to save costs we do that, and I remember coming from the Caribbean, from the island that I came from, we try to cut costs on our construction, and we end up with some really shabby stuff because the workmen, they are just worth their hire. And that's not what ought to be done if you want your work to be done well. So Solomon didn't do that. He sent for the best workers in brass, workers in wood, anyone who was skilled. He hired them. Okay, verse 16. And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work for the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapiter and 7 for the other chapiter. And he made the pillars and 2 rows round about upon the one network to cover the chapiters that were upon the top with pomegranates, and so did he for the other chapiter. And the chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits. And the chapiters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above, also against the belly which was by the network. And the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon the other chapiter. Whew. So I am picturing, I know what a pomegranate is. I know most of us have seen it's that red hot shell fruit, and you open it, they're the tiny red seeds. I'm thinking they were shaped like that, like a pomegranate. That's the work, engraving. I love to see good woodwork with engravings. I am so amazed at people's skill to take a piece of rough looking wood and just make it into something beautiful. It is a gift. So this is the work they were doing, and I'm thinking the chapiters are the top portions of the pillars that are nicely squared out to finish the look of the whole pillar, post, and building. Oh my goodness. I'm not too versed in construction, but I love to see construction, new construction or renovations. I just love it. Verse 21. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin, and he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz. That was so interesting. He named the pillars of the house. I wonder why he did that. Of the temple. Jachin and Boaz. And I know Boaz was his great-grandfather. Jesse was his grandfather. Yeah, that was his great-grandfather's name. So I don't know if that had something to do with it. And if Jachin was his mother's father's name, that's so interesting, isn't it? Wow. Verse 22. And upon the top of the pillars was lily work, so was the work of the pillars finished. And he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. It was round all about, and his height was 5 cubits. And a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. And under the brim of it round about there were knops compassing it, 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. The knops were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and the 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set upon them, and all their hinder parts were inward. Oh my goodness. Now, for those of us who think we have these beautiful, lavish houses with pools, guess what? That was a swimming pool Solomon made. It was a pool. May not have been one of an Olympic-sized one, but it was big enough because it was going in the temple. He made an indoor pool. 12 oxen were holding up the basin. So I guess the basin is the part that held the water. The oxen were like the base of it, and there were 12 of them, and their faces were facing outside, so their behinds were all gathered to the inside of the base. Talk about, I've never seen any pools built like that today. They're always down in the ground and just plain old pools. That's something. And gold and brass, and oh my gosh, that's what he made. That's what they're calling a sea. That's what they're calling a sea. It's a pool. Okay, verse 26. And it was an handbreadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths. Now I'm thinking 2,000 baths are the quantity or volume of water that would have been in it. A bath may have been a certain quantity. Now a bath may have just been for one person. A bath, you know, they said like there were Roman baths around. So maybe one bath, a bath that would maybe a normal or regular sized bath. But this one was 2,000 baths. So who knows, the pool might have filled up an entire room. I don't know. It sounds massive. Wow, he made a swimming pool. Ah! Okay. Verse 27, and he made 10 bases of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. And the work of the bases was on this manner. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. And on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, and cherubims. And upon the ledges there was a base above, and beneath the lions and oxen were certain additions made of thin work. And every base had 4 brazen wheels and plates of brass, and the 4 corners thereof had undersetters under the laver, were undersetters molten at the side of every addition. So I'm thinking these bases were maybe like vases or vases or bowls or something that you would have maybe to put liquid in or something, because I believe they mentioned the laver were undersetters, 4 corners. So I'm thinking the laver went on top of the bases. Lavers are what you wash, you know, like how long in some movies we see people, they didn't have running water long ago, and they would have like a basin and a bowl, like a vase inside of it, a pitcher, and they would pour the water into the basin or the bowl and wash their hands, wash their faces. That's what I'm picturing, okay, without the pitchers, of course. So the lavers may have been filled by themselves with water. Again, this is my imagination. I'm using my own imagination. You can read it and use your own, but to me, this is what's coming across in my mind. Verse 31, and the mouth of it within the chapiter and above was a cubit, but the mouth thereof was round after the work of the base, a cubit and a half. And also upon the mouth of it were gravings with their borders, 4 square, not round. And under the borders were 4 wheels, and the axle trees of the wheels were joined to the base. And the height of a wheel was a cubit and a half cubit. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Their axle trees and their naves and their felloes and their spokes were all molten. And there were 4 undersetters to the 4 corners of one base, and the undersetters were of the very base itself. And in the top of the base was there a round compass of half a cubit high, and on the top of the base the ledges thereof and the borders thereof were of the same. Now, I think someone in construction might be able to understand some of these terms a lot better than me. I can't understand exactly what it is they have built there, but it sounds magnificent, with wheels like chariots, and all the borders and all the different gravings of animals and plants and flowers that are on these things. This is magnificent. Have you ever gone into a house? And I know some of these historical houses from long ago. I've been into Queen Liliuokalani's house in Hawaii. When you go inside there, I mean, you just have to stop. Your mouth will open and you just keep looking around. All at the top, there is work on the ceiling, there's work on the walls, there's carpet on the floor that is just out of this world. Go into someone's most likely it's going to be a historical place, unless you know a very rich person. I don't. So I had to go to this this museum house that a royalty lived in at one time. And it was so magnificent. And I know that didn't even touch Solomon's house. I know. So if that could look that grand, I don't know what I would have done looking into his house. Oh my goodness. Okay. Verse 36. For on the plates of the ledges thereof and on the borders thereof, he graved cherubims, lions, and palm trees, according to the proportion of every one, and additions round about. After this manner he made the 10 bases. All of them had one casting, one measure, and one size. Then made he 10 lavers of brass. One laver contained 40 baths, and every laver was 4 cubits, and upon every one of the 10 bases 1 laver. And he put 5 bases on the right side of the house, and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house, eastward over against the south. And Hiram made the lavers and the shovels and the basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he made King Solomon for the house of the Lord. Whew, that's a lot of work, a lot of craftsmen. Oh my goodness. A lot of craftsmanship. Beautiful. And I think God especially asked Solomon to use him. But Solomon knew for sure that he was the one to do the work. Verse 41. The 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were on the top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, and 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, even 2 rows of pomegranates for 1 network to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were upon the pillars, and the 10 bases and 10 lavers on the bases, and 1 sea, and 12 oxen under the sea, and the pots and the shovels and the basins and all these vessels which Hiram made to King Solomon for the house of the Lord were of bright brass. So this is all descriptions of the work that was done by this man called Hiram. I'm sure he had assistants, but he was the overseer of the project for all of those carvings and, oh my gosh, beautiful work. All of bright brass, they say. Verse 46, in the plain of Jordan did the king cast them in the clay ground between Succoth and Zartan. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because they were exceeding many. Neither was the weight of the brass found out. And Solomon made all the vessels that pertained unto the house of the Lord, the altar of gold, and the table of gold, whereupon the shewbread was, and the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side, and 5 on the left, before the oracle, with the flowers and the lamps and the tongues of gold. And the bowls and the snuffers and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold, and the hinges of gold, both of the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the house, to wit, of the temple. So was ended all the work that Solomon made for the house of the Lord. And Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, even the silver and the gold and the vessels did he put among the treasures of the house of the Lord. Oh my gosh. Woo! I tell you, Solomon did exactly as God instructed David, and David instructed him, very much like how God instructed Moses, and Moses passed it on to the children of Israel to build the ark and the temple, the tabernacle back then for God. It's the same way. Solomon spared no cost, no materials, nothing was too good for God. God made it all anyway. The gold, the silver, we go digging in the hills, and diamonds and rubies and emeralds and jewels that you can't even imagine. God made it all, and Solomon dedicated it right back to God in building the temple. Amen. That's the end of chapter 7. You ever wonder why they put all of those details in here? Why was it so detailed as to the work of the ark that Solomon did, and for even building his own house? It's to let us know God is a God of the best. We give God the best. We don't give God our leftovers and our wasted materials and stuff that has termites in it. We give God the best. And that is what Solomon did, because God owns everything anyway. Okay, that's it for our reading for today. Thank you all again for listening, for viewing. Read along. If you have any comments, let me know. Shoot them at me. I would be glad to hear. Sometimes you have better ideas than maybe I did, especially if you're in construction for this chapter. A little insight will help. Okay, so until then, rest, enjoy the day, and until our next reading, remember to keep listening, because faith comes by hearing God's word. Take care. Bye.